Hello, Camp Pros. This is Oliver Bregan, Summer and Family Camps Director at YMCA Camp Jewel.
And I'm Matt Hansberger, and I'm the Camp Director at Pierce Williams Summer Camp and Retreat Facility, and you are listening to First Class Counselors.
This series is for camp directors to give their counselors as they hire and prepare them for the upcoming summer.
That's right, because great camp directors know that their camp counselors have a hugely important job at camp. Their abilities make or break a camper's week, and they hold the keys to your camper retention.
Each episode, we will meet with some all-star camp staff to give your counselors the tools they need to make this summer the best one yet.
That's right. In today's show, we're going to be talking about camp as a job. So how it translates into the quote unquote real world, how it looks on your resume, and the overall benefits that you gain from the counselor experience. And we could give you some pretty good tips, but we decided to bring a pro on board. So we are so thrilled to be joined by Kim Aycock. And we're going to talk about all the amazing things she does. But Kim, can you just say hi and introduce yourself to the folks out there?
Of course. So my name is Kim Aycock, and it's so great to be with you, Matt and Oliver. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation because I am super passionate about it. So
that's right. So we're going to pick Kim's brain for the first part of this episode. And camp counselors that are listening to this, Kim has been a part of some really cool projects that will help you be able to communicate what the true value of your summer camp experience is to employers and to your parents and to universities as you apply for them. So we hope that this episode finds you in that time of year where you're thinking about that and thinking about how either to continue camp or find a job that'll help you afford to work at camp, all those great things. And Kim is here to help with her research. So before we get into that stuff, Kim, can you tell us about your camp story and how you got to be where you are today?
Sure. So I have actually never was a camper, and I was studying to be a teacher at a small school in Nebraska. And I got a little note in my mailbox one day that said, please come see me so we can talk about your summer plans. And this was from our guidance counselor. And so I made that appointment. And I show up in his office, and he looks me in the eye, even though he towered over me by a good foot or more. And he said, "What are you going to do this summer that's going to make you a better teacher?" And I looked back at him with a little sheepish grin, saying, "I am going to work at a fast food restaurant, the same one I worked at last summer." And that didn't go over well. And he said, "I really don't think that's going to help you be a better teacher, Kim." And I said, "So tell me, Dr. Galloway, what is it that you recommend?" And his answer was, I really think you need to see if you're cut out for working with kids. So I think you need to work at a summer camp. And being from the part of the country that I'm from, there weren't summer camps on every block or corner. And so that was not in my context. And so I had no idea really what he meant by that. And I said, well, let me think about it. And I came back 2 weeks later, and I wish I knew what I thought about in those 2 weeks, but I don't. But I just said, you know what, I'm going to go for it. And he threw a book on the table. He said, pick a state. Where do you want to go? I picked Wisconsin. And I ended up working at a resident camp, overnight sleepaway camp for 7 weeks. And I was the counselor to 10, 13, and 14-year-old girls that summer. And I, believe it or not, came back for 12 summers continuously at that one camp. Loved it so much. I did make it to be a teacher, but I was going from school to camp and school to camp. And finally, I decided I wanted to be at camp more than I wanted to be at school. So I then was able to find a full-time camp job in North Carolina. And then I got married and couldn't do the full-time camp anymore. So then I started my own consulting business. And here I am.
Amazing. And then, so Kim, through that consulting business and through your love of camp, you embarked kind of on a journey with Project Real Job to help counselors and help people discover why camp was so important. So you could be that guidance counselor to other people. So can you tell us about Project Real Job and the work that you've done with the American Camp Association?
Absolutely. And so, as I mentioned, I was studying to be a teacher, right? And so working at camp was a natural fit for me. And so it made sense. But for a lot of people, camp doesn't make sense. And one of the things that I was noticing, because I just have this lens that I'm always looking at the camp world with, that is staff focused. Because when I was a full-time camp director, that was my job. I hired close to 150 staff for the summer, and did all, worked on their training and the retention and all of that. So that was my focus. And so when I started noticing, through especially the summer camp Facebook professionals group, and then just in conversation with camp directors around the country, I started noticing that people were there's a lot of angst and a lot of anxiety, and just people feeling, just struggling to find camp staff. And I started wondering, I wonder why this is. And so Project Real Job was born as a task force with ACA. We are now going to turn into a committee, which is a good thing, because I didn't really know the difference. A task force has an end, but a committee is something that they feel needs to keep happening. So that means, I guess, they're happy with what we've done so far, and I haven't been fired from my volunteer job of helping to co-lead this particular effort. So it is an effort, and I work with a great co-leader. Her name is Dr. Deborah Jordan. She's a professor at East Carolina University, and she and I are actually only about less than 2 hours away from each other geographically. But we meet all the time and are just always trying to figure out ways that we can support camp's efforts to attract their staff, to hire and keep their staff. And then we've branched out into working with different subcommittees with our work. And so we've identified, there's stakeholders in the game. And so we want to get our students, college age folks, to come work at our camps. That would make the camp directors happy. But the colleges and universities also want these same students to pursue their academic work, or to do internships that match with whatever course that they are on, whatever path that is. And parents have a stake in it now, more so than ever. And so they want to know that their son or daughter is getting some value out of what they're doing in the summer, and that it's going to help them, project them to where they're going next. And then also the employers, we find, that a lot of employers don't necessarily know what it means. Like if somebody comes to them with camp counselor on their resume, well, what does that mean? To a lot of people, it just means that you have probably a really fun job, and that's it. So we are working really hard to create resources for camps across the board. So we've created a couple infographics that show the value of working at camp, that a college student or a camp staff could take to their parents, or take to their advisor, or to one of their professors, and say, this is why I want to work at camp this summer. This is why I need to work at camp this summer. What are those critical skills that they get? And then also how to translate camp onto a resume. So we are writing blogs and articles and presenting at conferences all over the place. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, we did a session at a conference. We called it Meet Staff Where They Are, Not Where We Wish They Would Be. And so trying to help camp directors understand those folks, the people who are listening to this podcast, where you are, and to meet them. So communicating with you in the way that makes sense to you, not the way that we would necessarily want to communicate. So it's all fun stuff.
That's great. It sounds like it's not only like research based and finding out that information, that you're being real advocates for camp counselors out there, which is kind of right in line with what we're trying to do here. We on one of our earlier episodes, we had a whole episode for directors and camp staff about being a Generation Z and working and how you as a Gen Z staff member can help translate your worth and your work habits and those things to camp directors who, and even myself and Oliver as millennials, where we're like, whoa, we don't know enough about this generation. So that's really great to hear that you're supporting counselors in that way. So one of the other things we try to do here on First Class Counselors is give counselors some practical skills that they can take away right now from our shows and apply to what's going on in their lives or making them a better counselor. Can you tell us some of the interesting findings that Project Real Job has uncovered about being a camp counselor, and some things through that counselors could use today or tomorrow or as they're going through this year?
Of course. And two of my favorite ones that I wanted to share with you are, if we go back, I'm a math teacher by training, but this is a little history lesson. So I don't know if you know this, but we're in the fourth industrial revolution. So industrial revolution number 1, this is where steam made its debut. Industrial revolution number 2, electricity, mass production, they show up. Number 3, we get automation, electronics, and computers. So being in the fourth industrial revolution, it's called an Internet of Things. And I had to really stop and think about, like, what does that mean? And I had to look it up. And so I went to the number 1 source, Google, and looked up what is the Internet of Things. And it's computers talking to computers without there being a human component. And so what is key about that is that a lot of the jobs that are we're going to become a human-centered economy down the road, because so many things are going to be taken over by automation and technology, that it's going to be so vital that the jobs that are going to be left that aren't taken up by those robots, if you will, you need to have very good human skills. And what better place to get those skills? We call them 21st century skills, like communication, critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration is the fourth one. And so those things are going to be a hot commodity for people. And the great thing is you need those. I mean, those are things that a lot of careers, almost any career needs that, not just one particular path. So that's one finding that I think is really interesting. The second one is, and I mentioned Google before, is that if you look at the top skills that Google hires for, that makes the best person to work at Google, computer skills doesn't show up in the top 5 or 6 on that particular list. It's actually much lower. So they also have done a very scientific approach to those things that make a good employee or good team member at Google. And the things are all the things that we do at camp really well, like being a good coach. So coaching our campers, coaching each other, being able to teach in a way that is understandable, speak in a way, so communication comes very key. Being a good listener is also part of that. Having social awareness, so we can read what somebody else might be expressing based on their emotions, right? And so we might and being empathetic. So camp counselors are really good at that kind of thing. We get in the camp world, we solve a lot of problems in very creative and interesting ways. And so that's another one that's on their list. And so to me, that speaks volumes for, I think more people, the world needs to know that those skills are just crucial to being successful in just about any job. So.
Right. So you're saying, Kim, that it's not just that convincing people that camp is important. It's convincing people what the new skill set is important going into this economy. Because once you have to get people to that before you can start talking about even camp building those skills. Because you're saying collaboration in my head, I'm like, okay, leading small group discussions and those kinds of things. And I'm already thinking about how it applies to camp, but we can't even get into that until we start talking about what the necessary skills in this industrial revolution or in this way of the world working. So that's great. And that's a perfect segue, I think, into some of the discussions that we want to have today. So I'm going to throw it over to Oliver, and we're going to talk a little bit about starting to hone in on what camp does and how we can help translate what camp does for our staff members into actions for resumes, interviews, and translating that into society. Oliver.
Yeah, I think it's really cool because, if you go and you kind of look up camp nowadays, you're going to be looking at, TV shows like Meatball or movies like Meatballs or, now I'm blanking on all of them, but Bunked on TV. It's, there's typically a problem at camp, right? Usually not a very good counselor, or you're looking at, Kumbaya. There's this really kind of not always the greatest sell for camp and entertainment and media. So how does the work with like Project Real Job and the work you do, Kim, kind of get rid of the stigma that camp currently has?
So I think one of the key things I mentioned was all those stakeholders, right? And so trying to really educate them so they know the value of working at camp. And so one of the things I'm going to challenge the counselors who are listening to this podcast and the directors who might be using it to help your counselors is to really practice and know what your why is. So if somebody asks you, why are you working at summer camp? The answer that they probably think you're going to give is, oh, because it's really fun and I, don't have to do very much this summer or whatever. That's what they're sort of expecting. This isn't a serious job. But we need to be better than that. We need to have a better answer than, oh, it's just a fun job, right? So I'm going to give you some thoughts on some things that maybe like what your answer might look like. So I'm going to give you an example of, so I just a little over a year ago moved to a new place in North Carolina. One of the things you have to do, or that I wanted to do, is I wanted to join a gym. So I'm filling out my paperwork. I'm sitting at the desk at the gym, and the guy just like sort of asked me a question. He goes, "So Kim, what is it that you do?" So I started with my old answer, and I said, well, I work with summer camps. I work with camps all around the country, and I do staff training. And he looked at me, he kind of looked up and he goes, "Oh, that's cool." And then he kept working. And then I stopped for a second and I said, "You know what, Kim, you are way better than this. You've been practicing this even." And so I told the guy, I said, "You know what, I gave you completely the wrong answer. And so I want you to ask me that question again." And he says, "Okay." And so he says, "Kim, what is it that you do?" And I said, I am in the business of developing young people with the skills that robots can't do. Mm. And he looked at me and he's like, "Now that is really cool." And so I challenge you to think of so having your answer of what is your why? Why are you doing what you do? So when I was doing some staff training this past summer and I did a session on sort of the Project Real Job and helping with translating on a resume and all these things that we're talking about right now, I told that story to this particular staff. And I said, "So what's going to be your answer?" And one of the staff members said to me, they said, "Well, can we use your answer?" And I said, "Of course you can." So that's one answer, right? Why are you working at camp this summer? Because you want to learn things that robots can't do. And that'll get people's attention. And then you can flesh that out a little bit more. The second thing I think that you could potentially say is, why are you working at camp? Well, because in any field, and you can fill in the blank if you know what field you're going into, but many of us don't at that age, right? We're still trying to figure that out. And that's one thing that I think is really interesting, Matt, when you were bringing up, because another interesting fact is that the number of times that people change jobs or careers today is so much more than it used to be, back when I was going to school or my parents were going to school. So you really need to be adaptable to lots of different, potential things that you could end up doing. And so what are some things that kind of cross the board? So you can tell, let's say you were wanting to go into the medical field, and you could say, well, because in the medical field, I know that I need to know how to communicate with my patients. I know I need to communicate with the fellow, like other doctors or hospital staff or whatever the case may be. I know I'm gonna have to work on a team. I know I'm gonna have to solve problems that take creative ways of answering them. And so school is teaching, the classes that they're taking is teaching them the technical aspect of their job, but they're not getting the sort of the soft skills of their job, which are those really important intra and interpersonal skills. So I wouldn't go into that long explanation, but if you can sort of boil that down and let them know, in my field or in any career that I need to go into, I want to go into, I'm going to learn the skills and you could rattle off a couple of the big ones, and that should also get their attention.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love those big statements. And just as you were thinking, I was taking some notes, and I was like, what's my why? Like, what would I say when I was a camp counselor? And if I was brave enough to say to somebody, I would say, I'm giving kids the social and emotional experience that school can't.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make teachers, like, I'm a teacher as well. And so that's not a slight against teachers, but you know, I tell people all the time that camp is so important because we have just that better ratio, even of like positive role models to kids. And so, you know, I'm a camp director because I want to help staff become those positive role models for kids so they can have a great experience. The other tip that I think I would give to counselors is to think about what camp has done for you. And then a great way to transition that is say, and I want to do that for kids. And I do that by X, Y, Z. So you can kind of set up the conditions of talking about your why, and then talk about how camp gave you those skills and how you use those every day to give kids that same experience that you had.
And I think if somebody's new to camp, if they've never worked at camp before, so, you know, and so many kids today don't have a whole lot of, you know, families are smaller. So you don't have the older siblings as much taking care of the younger siblings, or there isn't as much babysitting as used to. I mean, we were much older when you babysit, if you babysit at all now. So really having a lot of experience working with kids, but we are all kids, right? We all have experience being kids because we were kids at one point. Some of us just a lot longer ago than others. But I think another great answer that you could say is, you know what, I want to work at camp because I know that kids today are more isolated than they've ever been. Because it's that whole idea of we're so connected, but yet we're completely disconnected. That sort of, you know, dichotomy, or what's the word when they're completely opposites, you know, same kind of word, but meaning completely two different things. Yeah. And so, you know, I want to help kids know how to have some friends and build friends in real time and in FaceTime. And as a bonus, as a staff member, you have an automatic set of friends by working at camp, and they're like-minded people who are coming together. So yeah, so those would be some of my answers that I would be, but I definitely want to really practice your why and be prepared to answer that so that you get people thinking and be like, of course you should go work at camp. I don't know, you know, I can't think of anything else better that you should do. So
yeah.
Yeah, I love the why, and something that I know here we teach I say it's probably the most important lesson that we teach is the why, how, what is, why are you doing what you're doing, how are you going to go about doing it, and then what specifically you're doing to make that all possible. It's one of the most important lessons I think we teach here, because it gives each one of our counselors a purpose while they're here on camp, other than, you know, I'm the sports instructor. So it gives them more behind the actions they practice.
Love it.
What about transferring it over onto a resume, Kim? So, you know, so that if I'm taking that 11 seconds that some employers do to just look at the sheet of paper, how do I look at camp counselor and not just see camp counselor, cool, moving on? How do I make it stand out on that little piece of paper to make sure people know who I am and what I'm capable of doing?
So I would recommend, well, first of all, we have a handout that we can share with you from AACA's Project Real Job. So you can have actually a resource that breaks down some of those like keywords that you can use to help with that translation process. But I think if you can put any of your experience into a context that matches whatever potential audience that you're going to have. So you may be able to share the same camp story, but spin it a little bit differently depending on who it is that you're trying to grab their attention, right? So it could be, you know, so you were, one of the things that you did at camp is you were, you know, had to get up a bunch of unruly teenagers up in the morning, you know, and get them on their way and get them out the door and get them to breakfast and all those kinds of things. So you probably aren't going to put those exact words on a resume, but what does that translate to? It translates that you have leadership skills where you can, work with the group and you can get them from point A to point B. You have a goal, and you have the steps that you take to get to that goal. So really thinking about the context of who your audience is, I think is key. And so, like I said, we have a handout that can be really helpful for that. So.
Yeah, I always love when I get a counselor who wants to become a doctor or a nurse or something, and they go, well, camp doesn't really have a lot of adequate skills for this. And I go, well, you do get first aid training while you're here. You actually are a lifeguard. And not only that, you have to make sure that the 8 to 10 kids in your cabin get their meds regularly at a specific time, that they eat healthy food, that they're living a healthy lifestyle while they're here at camp. I think you could put that on a resume if you really thought about it. So thinking about, I think Kim hit it on the head, is who's your audience at the end of the day, and how do you transfer some skills that you have here at camp over to them?
Well, I think for some of those harder, that you might not think, like an engineer, for example, or, again, I think it's going back to those, emphasizing those intra and interpersonal skills that you now have, that can be beneficial, again, and no matter what profession it is. So.
I want to throw in 2 quick things. One, when we're talking about our jobs at summer camp, please never use the word supervised. Because supervised to me sounds so clinical of like what you're doing. And it also sounds like you're just like standing at the edge of the soccer field watching kids play soccer rather than engaging with them. And if you're standing at the side of the field watching kids play soccer, then you need to be better, because we shouldn't do that. But we facilitate, we engage with kids, we lead them, we help people grow. All of these statements are really strong leading statements. So I would say that make sure you don't sell what you're doing short in those short sentences. And then maybe as a practical tip, I think what you could do in one of your bullet points below working, your camp job, you can say on a daily basis, use skills such as, and then you can just drop a couple of those: problem solving, collaboration, this, and then what did you achieve with that to give kids a memorable and amazing summer camp experience. It'll work different for certain people and certain audiences, but I think making sure that you emphasize those words, and without it sounding buzzwordy, but I think those buzzwords are important because that's what we do on a daily basis at camp. So throw a couple of those in, and then talk about that you used those to make a camper's life better. And then I think that'll get you past that like 12-second skip over.
And I will also, and I'll be happy to share this with you all for the notes for the show, but is if when you're at camp, if you take the time to just write down some of these different experiences that you have, or examples of those skills like communication or leadership or showing patience or persistence or collaboration, any of those things, if you can just jot down a little example of how that played out, or a specific situation, then you'll be able to really, when it comes time a couple months later after camp, then you can go back to those notes and use it to really, come up with your resume and have some concrete examples. So, and if we're close enough to the summer now, depending on where you are. I mean, if you worked at camp last summer, just take some thought time before you start writing your resume, and just come up with scenarios in your head that like, wow, I really practiced this in this particular situation, and just jot them down, and then see where it goes with your resume, how you can wordsmith it.
Yeah. Is there anything at camp that a counselor could potentially measure? I know that something that I look for on resume is sometimes numbers, like how large was the group size, or how, I know with people in, say, high ropes careers, they might say how many hours they've had on high ropes elements. Is there anything like that at camp that you might recommend as far as a number to put on resumes?
I think, well, something I think that's key that I'll mention when we talk about interviews, but it would play out here, is also the repeatability. And so Matt, you alluded to it when you said on a daily basis. So this isn't something that we do just one time, right? We don't just practice communication once, we do it all summer long. So if there's ways that you can kind of, maybe it's not necessarily a number like 40 times, but it's, you know, indicates that you did this on a regular basis. And so that would be that's my first thought about kind of how you might be able to weave some numbers in there, or quantify it in some sort of way. So
so now getting it off that paper and being someone in an interview, what kind of things can you say or do that come across in the interview that might be able to help you get that job because of camp experience?
So I would also say the writing down of the examples that you have, so that you have some in your head before you go into an interview. And again, you really want to think about your audience, you know, so who you're talking to and how you might spin a particular situation depending on what kind of job you're hoping to get based on this particular story. And I think the key is just thinking of it as a story, right? And so there's different methods, different acronyms that people use. The one that I'm going to share now is one that somebody who we've been working with on our Project Real Job team. His name is Daniel Shore. He's a PhD student at George Mason University. He calls it the STARRY method, and he spells STAR STARRE. So when you tell a story in an interview, if you can spell out, you know, what's the situation, or task. So the S and the T kind of go together. So you spell that out. What's the situation? What's the task? The A is, how did you act? And then the R is, what was the result? What was the outcome of that particular action that you did? And then where he takes the STAR, the traditional STAR method, a little bit further, is he adds on the second R, which stands for repeatability, that I mentioned earlier. So you're again saying, you know, this was something, you know, that I did this weekly, like I led a staff meeting weekly or whatever. And then the E is the emotion that gets attached to the situation that you described. So you may be talking about something where at first, maybe it was something that you didn't do so well at. Maybe that you're asked about a failure that you experienced and how you bounced back from it. So your emotion could be, you know, look, I was really frustrated at the beginning because things just weren't going well. I was not doing things, I wasn't on my game. But as I got more confident, as I practiced more, again, this is the repeatability, I became more confident, and I was able to, by the end of the summer, I was able to, you know, knock that out and you know, lead a staff meeting like nobody's business, or lead a group of campers, you know, or whatever the situation that you're describing. So, so I love that because it kind of gives you a structure, and it's a story structure. So you can really, it's pretty easy to talk to those points.
That's awesome. And I think from, you know, the pretty much near hundreds of camp staff that I've interviewed, and Oliver, I know your number's way north of that, and Kim, you're north of that. But with the staff that we interview, there's nothing more disappointing than when someone doesn't tell me a story about a situation, right? That if they just say something that's flat and don't elaborate, and there's no emotion behind it, it's just an answer. I want to know more, and I want to have that conversation as the interviewer. So, and I can only imagine in other jobs and other positions, when you're applying for maybe a retail job or a job at a fast food restaurant, I think if you can like throw an emotional story about how you managed a camper situation, and you had to work with a diverse group of opinions from a camp cabin to solve the crisis of what we were going to do after lunch, I think that is much more powerful and can translate to your abilities more than just saying, I helped kids decide what they were going to do after lunch, right? Or talking about what you did in school that day. I think there's, you know, working with kids too, it elicits that more emotional response too. So
yeah, it's amazing to give a structure to it, just because New can now operate. But I always tell counselors in an interview are at an advantage because of the fact that you've been social all summer. You know how to talk to somebody else who's across the table from you. So you're a little bit less intimidated.
And I would say, again, so to the directors who are listening to this, I would suggest this is something that you could do very easily and help your counselors practice this. So what if you just asked a question every, once a week at staff meeting where they were with a partner and they practiced answering, and you start out really simple. Like one way to start would just be, hey, what was your favorite thing that happened to you this week? And start practicing the structure of the story, and then get more specific as the summer goes on. So you could add in, a specific time when you solved a conflict, or a specific time when you, were in a situation where you had to problem solve and come up with a solution for a particular challenge that you were having. So practice is key, I think.
Yeah, the one thing that I wanted to mention too, in terms of that, just things that you can actually say to an interviewer. The one thing that I don't want you as counselors to discredit yourself on is the amount of problem solving that you do as a camp staff member. I think above all, I was thinking about this as I was setting up for a school program today. My brain was just, as I was working and gathering stuff and chopping wood, I was just thinking about, okay, so where is this group going to move, and how is this transition going to work? And then I was working through that just subconsciously. And you as a camp counselor are doing that literally all the time, because you're balancing 8 to 10 kids' problems or wants or desires all at once to make sure that they are each having their own great camp experience, and building cabin unity, and making sure that everyone's gone pee, and making sure that everyone's water bottles are filled, and making sure that you're covering all those facts, and making sure that you are surviving and having that rest and all of that as well. So you're constantly problem solving, and that I think above almost anything is something that camp does extremely well to help grow future leaders and great camp staff members. So please make sure that you have a story, a starry story that talks about problem solving, because I think employers are going to want to hear about that.
Well, and the flexibility and the adaptability that you have is just unparalleled. I mean, the things that camp counselors do on the fly that just, I've seen just some amazing sort of those MacGyver moments where, they make something out of nothing and it turns into this, great thing, and minimal resources, if any resources at all, And so those are things that you just don't want to skip over, because those can definitely show your innovation and your creativity and thinking on your feet and all of that good stuff. So,
yeah. But I also like to emphasize, it's not just that problem solving, but the forethought. It's just impressive to watch counselors walking around camp with all these kids, and they, you say, oh, can you go and do this? And they go, yeah, oh yeah, I can totally do that. Can you just make sure that this camper has this camper has this camper has this camper has this? And they know all the needs of their campers ahead of time, because they know what's coming up. They have to have that pre-thought so that they can eliminate obstacles in the future. And that is an amazing quality to have. And it's consistently practiced at camp. It's pre-problem solving, which is just as incredible. You can't put that into a skill column without it being impressive.
I think going on the other end of it too, the post resiliency that camp counselors have is so impressive too, because they, you can spend hours and hours and hours creating something magical, and then it rains. And if it rains, camp doesn't stop. You got to make camp magical, and your director isn't going to bail you out, because they can't bail everyone out. So you have to find a way to make that rain plan amazing. And whether it's playing in the rain, or whether it's changing on, like you said, on the fly of what they're doing, things change at a moment's notice, whether that's a kid's emotions or the weather or the camp schedule, all those things. You just have to be adaptable and resilient too, because you don't get to cry when it rains, because you don't want the kids to cry, but you got to make sure you're resilient there too. So it sounds like we're saying before and during and afterwards, you're basically a superhero.
24/7.
Uh, what about real quick for that counselor who's planning on coming back next year, but they want to be in a leadership role. They want to be taking on a little bit more responsibility as far as the organization and behind the scenes of camp. What's your recommendation for them, Kim, as they go into, right about now and maybe in a month or so for a lot of camps, that application period, that start of trying to move on up in the camp world?
Great question. I think I think there's a reflection piece to think back on, maybe if the counselor can identify some growth, areas of growth that they experienced over the summer, and how that could play into a potential leadership role at camp would be one suggestion that I would have. If you are at camp this summer and that pops up where you're thinking, gosh, I'd really like to take on more responsibility, talk to your director about it at that time. And there may be even some things that could, you could test the waters a little bit, or you could volunteer to, take part in something that is of interest to you, that would just be really helpful. Just even something as small as, being the person who takes on posting the Instagram account or something like that. Just thinking about those things that you do now that you like to do, and then how does that look at camp? There's so many things those little things that make a huge difference, that directors would be like, yes, please, thank you. I really need that, even just, like I said, just posting of Instagram, that's huge. It's a small piece, but it's very huge. So I think just reflecting on your growth from last summer, what you noticed that you've how you've developed, and then also maybe some thinking ahead, like where you'd like to go, what skills would you like to continue working on, and how working in that particular leadership role could help you advance those particular skills. And if you are working or do, things, you have experiences that are happening right now at school that your camp director may not know about, right? Go ahead and talk, glean those out. What are you learning right now that could really benefit camp, or that you could see kind of playing out in camp? So I'm laughing because my dog is he's decided it's time to play. So
I Kim, you're taking the words right out of my mouth, and it's awesome. I'm just like smiling and nodding along. I think getting in touch with your director is really important too, and because I think that sometimes staff, it makes me really upset when at the end of the summer, a staff was like, man, I was preparing all year for that week at Wilderness, and then I didn't get it. And I was like, I had no idea. I thought you hated tents. And they were like, I slept in one every day in my backyard. So make sure you're telling them those as well. And I think as well, if you are taking on employment in the off season, really treat that as a learning opportunity for working at camp. So if you want to be the head counselor at your camp, or whatever, unit leader, whatever you want to call that, step up to be supervising others, make sure that you're surrounding yourself and taking on more and volunteering in your own organizations or with your schools or those kinds of things to take on that supervisor experience. Because not only, and not just for the resume building aspect of it that your director might see, but so that you can build those starry stories from within your off season to talk to your camp director about next year.
Yes, for sure. Yes to all of that.
Let's see. We're about 264 days away from. Oh.
You're good.
All right. We're about 264 days away from summer camp, at least here at Camp Jewel. But what are some things that our counselors can start doing to get ready? It's our Get Ready segment. So, Matt, do you have anything that our counselors could do to get ready this far away from summer?
Well, Kim, you've inspired me. I'm going to steal one of yours, and I hope that you weren't planning this one as well. But I think that I want you to work on your why. I had one that was like, make sure that you are taking on self-care, blah, blah, blah. work on your why. That is so important for right now, that you can start to translate that and work on it with another camp staff member as well. So what I want you to do to get ready is call up a staff member, one of your friends that you hang out with in the summertime, and work on your why together. Tell them to listen to this episode and then work on your why together.
Kim, do you have any advice this far away from summer camp on how to start getting ready?
I think this is a great time to really do that reflection on the past summer of what there's enough space between last summer and now, I think, to sort of really have a good perspective. I think if we do it too early, right at the end of the summer, we're not, it's jaded maybe one way or the other. And so this is a time to really, really think about, last summer and those things that you learned. And then also to start thinking a little bit about next summer, where do you want to go? Where are you headed? And so this is a kind of, you're caught in the middle between those two places. And so you can play that to your advantage. And if you've never been to camp before, if you're the lucky one who you're going to get to experience camp for the first time this summer, don't forget to pack a little notepad and something to write with, so you can jot down all these great things that happen over the summer, so that you can have your stories to tell later.
Yeah, I jokingly have been talking to the rest of the staff here, and I just said it's reading season, and I've ordered probably like 15 to 20 books in the last week that I plan on reading, and just taking the time and going through all the different resources so that I just have information. I think learning is really important, and summer kind of calms down a little bit, and now we're in the fall, so I can go out into the nice New England changing leaves with a nice warm coat and read a book at a picnic table, and it's just a good time. And I get a lot of learning done, so it's pretty cool.
Oliver,
books.
Yeah, I want to know, what are you reading, Oliver?
Oh, let me see. I got a bunch of Bob Ditter books recently, so I'm really excited to break into those. And I got a couple about interviewing. I figured if I could get some really good interview questions going, I'd have a good time doing some interviews come November. So
shout out to Bob Ditter.
Yeah, shout out to Bob Ditter.
Big
what a
shout
guy.
out to Bob Ditter. Yes.
So plenty of books. I'll list some of the ones that I'm reading in the show notes, just because, like I said, I ordered like 15, so they all just came in a big Amazon box, and I was like, all right, it's time to start. And I just took my Amazon box home with me. So let's get going.
That's awesome. And we've mentioned show notes a couple of times. If you are listening to this and want to check out some of the awesome things that Kim has shared, and you want to see Oliver's book list, you can do that at camphacker.tv/podcast, and you'll be able to see the First Class Counselors feed right from there. Before we go, Kim, can you please share some ways that people can either get in touch with you or find out some information about Project Real Job to give them all of the resources that you've been talking about for this podcast?
Absolutely. So I will put this in the show notes, but a lot of it's on the ACA website. So acacamps.org, and I'll give you the specific link so it's easy to find. I've also, on a Pinterest board, I've collected a bunch of articles and resources that play into that Project Real Job related. So I'll share that as well. And then just for me personally, I have a website, kimaycock.com, and you can get in touch with me there. So would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Oliver, if people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
You could just get me on my email. So it's Oliver.Gregan, GREGAN at GHYMCA.org, or you can just hit me up on Facebook. It's just my name. Hit me up on Messenger. Ask whatever questions you want, or have a cool camp combo.
That's great. I also wanted to, I forgot what my other get ready was. I want to put it out there that I'm moving into a bit of a slower time in camp work right now. And if you get a hold of me at my email, which is matt@gocamp.pro, send me your camp resume. Straight up, send me your resume and I will look at your summer camp section. I'm not a pro, I'm not Kim Aycock, but I want to give you a hand and give you some feedback on it. So if you would like that and take that opportunity, you can send me your resume at matt@gocamp.pro. All right.
One last thing that just came to mind when you said that, Matt, is also I think camp staff need to know that your directors are some of the best references around. And so they get to see you in ways that so many other people never would. And so those folks can really write you some killer reference letters. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me see. If you enjoyed today's show, we'd be so grateful if you would go to camphacker.tv/love. That link will get a tweet ready for you that talks about the show.
That's right. And you talking about first class counselors is huge for us. And something else that you can do to help us out is review the show on iTunes. We would love it if you went to camphacker.tv/iTunes, then click the ratings and review button, or head to that website that Oliver mentioned, camphacker.tv/love, and you can send us some love for the new show. If you have any suggestions or ideas for guests or future topics to help make you a better camp staff, please send those along to myself at matt@gocamp.pro.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kim. And don't forget, for everybody, if you want to find the show notes of all this awesome information we had here, you go to camphacker.tv/podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matt and Oliver.
Thanks, everybody. And remember, camp is camp, and camp is all good.